For nearly 5 centuries, the Roman Empire was the sun around which the world revolved. Its roads stretched to the ends of the earth. Its legions were the iron standard of civilization. But by the 4th century A.D., that sun was setting. The empire was divided, fractured, and weary. And from the dark, misty forests of the east, a nightmare was approaching, one that Rome had no name for. They appeared like ghosts on the horizon. They didn't march. They flowed like a river of iron and horsehair. The Romans called them the Huns. To the civilized world, they weren't just men. They were a punishment, a scourge sent to whip a corrupt age into submission. Where did they come from? For generations, historians have debated the link between these Huns and the Xiongnu of the Mongolian steppes. While their blood had mingled with a dozen tribes across a long migration, their soul, so the Romans believed, remained the same. They carried the composite bow, terrifying horsemanship, and an appetite for empire that had been forged centuries earlier. But now they had found a new leader, a man whose name would become synonymous with the end of the world. A man who didn't just want tribute. He wanted the soul of Rome itself. This is the story of the twilight of antiquity. This is the story of Attila. When the Huns first crossed the Volga River around 370 A.D., they didn't just invade Europe, they shattered it. Their arrival hit the continent like a tectonic shift against a crumbling seawall. It triggered the Great Migration, a domino effect of fear, pushing Germanic tribes like the Goths and Vandals into Roman territory in a desperate fight for survival. The Huns were unlike anything the West had ever seen. They didn't fight for land to farm. They fought as predators moved by pressure, momentum, and opportunity. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus wrote in terror, "They are so monstrously ugly and misshapen that one might take them for two-legged beasts." He described a people who never touched a plow, who lived on horseback, who seemed to be glued to their saddles. To a Roman who worshipped the stone city and the paved road, the Hun looked like an aberration of nature. But beneath the prejudice was a sophisticated, terrifyingly efficient military machine. By the early 5th century, the Huns had moved from loose war bands to a centralized superpower based in the plains of modern-day Hungary. They had become the protection racket of the ancient world. Both the Western Empire in Ravenna and the Eastern Empire in Constantinople were paying humiliating sums of gold simply to keep them away. In 434 A.D., the Hunnic throne was inherited by two brothers, Bleda and Attila. At first, they ruled as partners, squeezing the Eastern Empire for every ounce of tribute it could produce. But the steppe only has room for one alpha. Attila was not a man built for sharing the sun. Attila was a student of power. He was short and broad-chested, with a large head and small, piercing eyes. But his true strength was his mind. He didn't dress in the gold and jewels he took from his enemies. He wore simple wool and ate from wooden plates. It was a calculated show of humility, a silent insult to the flamboyant, decadent Romans. He wanted them to understand he could not be bought, only feared. In 445 A.D., Bleda died. The official records are restrained, but the whispers of history suggest a darker truth, that Bleda was removed during a hunt and that Attila was the hand behind it. Now, for the first time in generations, the nomadic world had a single, absolute master. Attila also understood the power of myth. Legend says a shepherd found an ancient, rusted sword buried in the earth and brought it to the king. Attila declared it the sword of Mars, the weapon of the god of war. With it, he wasn't just a ruler, he was destiny made flesh. He turned first to the east. He ravaged the Balkans, burning and breaking cities so thoroughly that the devastation lingered for years, leaving whole regions scarred and unrecognizable. He pushed to the very walls of Constantinople. The Eastern Emperor, Theodosius II, was forced to multiply the tribute, sending staggering sums of gold simply to keep Attila from turning the capital into ash. But Attila knew the real prize, and the real weakness lay in the west. He was waiting for a spark. And in 450 AD, he received a letter that changed the course of history. In the court of the Western Roman Empire, Honoria, the sister of Emperor Valentinian III, was in trouble. Trapped in stifling tradition and forced toward an unwanted marriage, she committed an act that would ignite half of Europe. She sent a secret messenger to Attila, enclosing her signet ring, begging for protection. Attila, the ultimate opportunist, chose to interpret the ring as a marriage proposal. He claimed Honoria as his wife and demanded half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. The emperor refused. Rome was horrified. Attila had his excuse. In 451 AD, he gathered a grand coalition of Huns, Ostrogoths, Gepids, and Alans, an army some sources describe as vast beyond anything the West could comfortably answer. He crossed the Rhine, and his path was marked by the smoke of burning cities, places like Metz vanishing into panic and flame. The scourge had arrived in Gaul. Rome had only one man who could stop him, Flavius Aetius, the man they called the last of the Romans. The rivalry between Attila and Aetius is one of history's greatest ironies. As a young man, Aetius had lived as a hostage among the Huns. He had eaten their meat, ridden their horses, and learned their tactics better than any man alive. He had known their rhythm and their logic. He was once Attila's friend. Now he was his nemesis. Aetius managed the impossible. He convinced the Visigoths, the very people the Huns had once driven into Roman lands, to join Rome in a desperate alliance. In June 451 AD, the two greatest forces of the age met at the Catalonian plains. It was among the bloodiest battles of late antiquity. The chronicles describe a day so violent that even the landscape seemed to recoil. Men and horses collapsing in heaps, lines breaking, reforming, and breaking again. It was a chaotic, swirling nightmare of horse archers, heavy infantry, and allied war bands, all grinding together in a storm of steel. And Attila, for the first time in his life, felt the sting of a stalemate. He retreated to his camp and built a massive pyre of wooden saddles, ready, if the worst came, to burn rather than be captured and paraded through Rome. But Aetius, ever the cold politician, allowed him to retreat. He feared that if the Huns were destroyed, the Visigoths would become the new masters of Europe. Attila was checked, but he was alive. And a wounded wolf is the most dangerous of all. The very next year, 452 AD, Attila struck again. If he could not have Gaul, he would have the heart of the empire, Italy. He crossed the Alps, descending like an avalanche. He destroyed Aquileia so completely that later generations struggled to find where it had stood. As he marched south, refugees fled into the lagoons of the Adriatic, building mud-flat settlements that would one day become Venice. Rome was paralyzed. There was no army left to stop him. Emperor Valentinian fled to the coast. The path to the Eternal City was open. But then, at the banks of the Mincio River, the scourge stopped. Attila was met, not by an army, but by a procession of priests. At the head was Pope Leo I. The king of the Huns and the bishop of Rome met in private. No one knows what was truly said. Some say the pope offered a mountain of gold. Others say Attila saw a vision of Saints Peter and Paul threatening him with death. Perhaps plague and famine in Attila's own camp were the truer saints that turned him back. Whatever the reason, Attila turned his horses around. Rome was saved, but its pride was shattered forever. Attila retreated to his palace in the Hungarian plains, planning a massive new campaign against the east. But death has a sense of irony no king can conquer. In 453 A.D., Attila took a new wife, a young woman named Ildiko. After a night of heavy drinking and celebration, the king retired to his bedchamber. The next morning his guards found him dead. The man who had survived 100 battles, who had defied the might of 2 empires, had died from a sudden hemorrhage, not by the sword, not on a battlefield. A Shakespearean end for a man who had shaken the foundations of the world. The Huns mourned their king in a way that unsettled Roman witnesses. They did not mourn with ordinary tears. They cut their hair and scarred their faces so that the greatest of warriors would be honored in the language of warriors. They buried him in a secret grave within a triple coffin, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron. To hide the tomb, legend says they diverted a river, buried him in the dry bed, then released the waters again. And those who sealed the secret were never allowed to carry it back into the world. To this day, the grave of Attila remains one of history's greatest lost treasures. With Attila gone, the Hunnic Empire vanished almost as quickly as it had appeared. His sons fought over the spoils. Subject tribes rose in rebellion. Within decades, the Huns were absorbed into the shifting tides of the steppe. But their impact was permanent. They had broken the spine of the Western Roman Empire, which would fall less than 30 years after Attila's death. They'd redrawn the map of Europe, setting the stage for the Middle Ages and the birth of nations. From Modu Chanyu in the east to Attila in the west, the Huns proved one thing: the civilized world is only as strong as the walls it builds, and no wall is high enough to keep out the wind of the steppe when it carries the whistling arrows of a unified people. Attila was gone, but the ghost of the Huns would haunt the European imagination for 1,000 years. The wolf had passed, and the world would never forget his howl.